Let's pray. Father, we just come before you and we thank you for the opportunity to be here. And we thank you for blessing us with just the time and the space to talk about space. And Lord, we pray that you would just open our minds and hearts to you. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're talking about space tonight. And if you recall from 2 weeks ago, we started this conversation. Does anybody remember anything about what we talked about 2 weeks ago? If you don't, you could look at your notes and pretend like you have it fresh on your mind. We were talking about the fine-tuning of the universe. And we were talking about all these cosmological constants that had to be just the right value for life to obtain here on the earth. And these are constants of the universe. And then we also talked about relationship of the earth to, say, the sun, relationship of the other planets to the sun, and all these other variables and features. Yes, sir? Yeah, there's a grip of them in the back there. And this is week 12. Week 12. And then I'll be passing out another handout about break time. So we're picking up on page 6, actually, at item 7. And we're kind of continuing the discussion. Last week we started to talk about how unlikely it is, or 2 weeks ago, how unlikely it is that we would be here to observe all the phenomena of the universe. It's very improbable. It's highly improbable. And so today we're asking the question, what best explains the fine-tuning of the universe and the observed features of the universe? And so now that everyone, and I say everyone, I mean the scientific community at large, Christian or non-Christian, agrees that these cosmological constants and these features of the universe and these relationships have to be what they are in order for life to be here. And any variation would prohibit life. Since that is true and the scientific community affirms that, what best explains it? What explanation does it justice? Or make sense of the scientific observations, so to speak? So we've talked about a few different options in the past. When we talked about biochemistry, what were the 3 possible scenarios we keep bringing up? Chance. What is it? Chance. What's the other? Physical necessity. And of course, design, yeah, or intelligent design ID. So if you look there on page 6, you have design. And I'm just stating, boom, this is the best explanation. And I'm not giving that any thorough thought right there, obviously. But I'm just saying that, okay, that's obviously what we're going to argue. And then physical necessity can't be this because it could have been otherwise. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about how these cosmological constants could have assumed a different magnitude of number. Could have been a different number by, say, 1% or 5,000%. They could be off what they are now. So it could have been different. So by definition, it cannot be physical necessity. So the observed features of the universe and the cosmological constants are said to be contingent. Okay? So that's a very important thing. So then we come to chance. And this is what we're going to look at first. But then when we reach basically astrophysics in this whole conversation of the class, we can then throw on a whole bunch of other naturalistic explanations. Whereas in biochemistry, or when we talked about the origin of life, we talked about physical necessity and chance. In this case, we have other options, but they're all naturalistic. We have this idea that the values that are changing over time. Okay, we'll talk about that. Or the multiverse hypothesis. Okay, or the bounce hypothesis. We're going to talk about these after the break. And the black hole created universe. And what's called a boundless finite universe. And so we'll look at these later, but right now let's look at chance. So we're talking about what are the chances of getting a planet like ours? What are the chances? How improbable is it? Well, all of our space exploration has shown that our neighbors in space are not remotely capable of sustaining life of any complexity. So it seems very improbable that life would have arisen on any of these neighboring planets. The probability for 9 life-supporting design characteristics existing in one of the traditional 9 planets of our solar system is 1 in 50 million. Just to get 9 life-supporting design characteristics. So, other solar systems will have this same improbability to beat. And so, this is very important. When we think about how likely is it that 9 design characteristics would have obtained, it's 1 in 50 million, okay? That's a very high improbability. Now, oh, by the way, Rachel, we're still on the last outline. I haven't passed out the outline for this week yet. Now, astrophysicist Hugh Ross has spent decades documenting all of the variables of the universe and the conditions required for life to obtain. And in his calculation, he references over, get this, 650 scholarly academic journal articles and books. Okay, so I've mentioned Hugh Ross before. He's a astronomer that used to work at NASA and Caltech, and now he runs the Reasons to Believe organization here in LA. And he has been doing this for decades. He spent about 3 decades documenting all of these features of the universe and cosmological constants. And he's done the homework, okay? And he references all of this stuff in his books and his writings. And these 650 academic journal articles, by the way, are published in, they're the main secular scientific journals. These are not ID journals of any sort. So he's documenting this based on the best and current research available. Now, if we just think of bacteria, for instance, on a planet, bacteria is very necessary for life. Now, we need bacteria in order for all sorts of things. We don't have to get into it, but it's necessary, right? So he says, what is involved in order to sustain bacteria on a planet for 3 months? What sort of things would be required? What sort of features would that planet or the universe have to have for bacteria to be sustained just for 3 months? And he says 501 parameters relate to the probability that bacteria can be sustained just for a few months. So there's 501 parameters that are involved, whether it's features or relationships in the universe or on the Earth or cosmological constants. He says based on the probability that each of the 501 individual parameters falls within its required range for this occurrence, the chance that all parameters occur exactly in the required range is 1 chance in 10 raised to the 311th power. This is huge, a mega number, okay? So to rephrase that, we could say there is 1 chance in 10 raised to the 311th power that a single planet anywhere in the universe would be able to sustain bacteria for a few months. Okay, so this is a big deal. Just for 3 months, you need all this stuff, and it's extremely unlikely. That's the gist of it. Now, we know that cells are required for life, right? So what is the probability that a planet could sustain a cell for, say, 3 billion years? Because that's how long, according to the older theory or naturalism, that cells have been around for, say, 3 billion years. Well, 676 parameters relate to the probability that unicellular life can be sustained for 3 billion years. Okay, so there's a lot more parameters relating to sustaining a cell, and this is for 3 billion years, okay? Now, based on the probability that each of the 676 individual parameters falls within its required range for this occurrence, the chance that all parameters occur exactly in their required range is 1 chance in 10 to the 556th power. So we can rephrase this and say there is 1 chance in 10 to the 556th power that a single planet anywhere in the universe would be able to sustain unicellular life for 3 billion years. Okay, so that's even more of an improbability, right? Extremely improbable. Now, what is the probability, okay, we're raising the stakes here, to get advanced life of our kind where we have a high-tech civilization, okay? 816 parameters relate to this probability to get intelligent life with a globally distributed high-tech civilization, and this could be sustained over time. So it's not like it's here for a minute and then gone. Okay, based on the probability to get all these 816 parameters to fall within its required range, the chance that all the parameters occur exactly in the required range is 1 chance in 10 raised to the 1032 power. Okay, this is just beyond belief, obviously. So to rephrase this, we could say there's 1 chance in 10 raised to the 1032 power that a single planet anywhere in the universe would be able to sustain an intelligent physical life in a globally distributed high-tech civilization. When I say high-tech, I mean like having ores in the ground where we can mine silicon and other iron and other things like this to have technology, cars, not necessarily computers, but machines, things like that. Yes, sir?
Is this point of Does it have a time element like the prior previous two?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check on that. Yeah. I would imagine it would be for some length of time. Yeah. Maybe we could say if humans have been around for, say, 100,000 years, let's just take this big fat number, then I would imagine that's what he's talking about. Or it could only be for 100 years, which would say our high-techness is maybe 100, 200 years old. So maybe that's what he's talking about. Now, we can continue this discussion, but that was kind of the biggest, climax right there. Now, if you wanted to break it down a little bit and say, okay, well, what about the galaxy cluster that our galaxy is in amongst other galaxies? What about our galaxy itself? What about our star? What about our planetary system? What about our planet? What about our planet's surface? If you look on the next page, he's getting at that, and he documents based on the bottom page 8 and all of page 9. He's documenting all of these parameters. If you just look at this with me, kind of glance at the page, you can see all these numbers, 140 parameters, 137 parameters, 268 parameters, and all of this relates to the galaxy cluster, the galaxy, the planetary system, the planet's surface. So he's really doing the best he can to sift out what is necessary based on a certain feature of the universe or a certain feature of our planet. What parameters are involved for life to obtain and be sustained and advanced life, by the way, and he's telling us how many or what the improbability is for those parameters to all obtain at the same time. So these numbers aren't as big as the 10 to the 1032 power, but it's just really exciting to know that he's really done his homework here, and he's really broken this down as best as he could. I don't think so, because it's just a matter of the way he does it. It's just a matter of statistics. The only thing I can see being a problem with how he does it is he places. This is kind of interesting. That's a good question. So, like, say we had, if you go back to page, 4. At the bottom of page 4, I give you a little bit of a list, and these are 402. This is part of 402 observed features of the universe. Okay, so say the flux of cosmic ray protons. Okay, so let's call that item V there, 5. The flux of cosmic ray protons. What he does is he lists all these things, and he's going down. He's got 402 of them, right? And we talked about the cosmological constants. He's got a group of those too. But the flux of cosmic ray protons, what he does is he puts a probability figure to this. So he'll put the probability figure of, say, I'm just going to make up one, say 0.02 or 2%. This is the likelihood that this occurs anywhere in the universe at the right relationship or at the right constant for life to obtain within that planetary system. So he says 2%, and then he'll go down the next one, so we'll call it 6, right? And he'll say, oh, this one is probably 10% chance. So it's 10% likelihood that this will occur. Okay, so what happens with probability, if you remember, you have to multiply the probabilities together for all of these to occur at the same time. So you have 2%, 10%, these are all being multiplied by each other. So all these little numbers, and some of them are like really small, you know, and some of them are like that again, you're going to get these 10 to the 311th power. That's how you arrive at these calculations that he's doing. Now, what someone could argue, perhaps to refute him, is saying, oh, well, it's really not 2%. It's like, say, 10%. So that's wrong. Sorry, Hugh Ross. And someone could do the same thing here. Ah, that's probably a little higher, say 20%, you know, or something like that. And then you multiply these probabilities again. But once you get, you know, hundreds of these things documented, you're still going to be at an extremely low improbability. It may not be 10 to the 311th power. It could be 10 to the, you know, 250th power when you get done with these revisions. So either way, I mean, you're still talking about huge improbabilities. And this stuff is in all the literature like he's referenced. So unless he's misunderstanding the literature or the scientific journals, then this stuff is going to be pretty relatively accurate or within a ballpark range. The point is, it's extremely improbable. And that's the idea here. Other questions? So if you go back to page 9, at the bottom, we can say that overall we see that a planet like ours is in a planetary system like ours, in a galaxy, in a galaxy cluster like ours, is very, very, very low. And so it is, on the next page, it is highly unlikely that we are the result of chance, and it's much more easily inferred is that we exist and are sustained due to a divine mind. So the chance hypothesis of this being likely or this being probable, that the fact that we're here, doesn't really work, because everybody realizes it's extremely improbable, Christian and non-Christian. So it's not really something that's debated, the chance hypothesis. So if you go there to the middle of the page, and we just quickly take a look at these quotes, but did you have a question?
Yeah, you said second, non-technical, do they have a technical comeback?
Yeah, we're getting to that, yeah. So many famous astronomers and astrophysicists agree that there is fine tuning. Now this guy is pretty old, Sir Fred Hoyle, he's passed away. He says a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics, or with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology. So he's just by this statement claiming that there's a mind behind all this. And then George Greenstein, astrophysicist, he says, as we survey all the evidence, the thought insistently arises that some natural agency, or rather agency, some supernatural agency, or rather agency must be involved. So again, he's stating that, not a Christian. And then this guy's also not a Christian, Paul Davies, very famous guy. The impression of design is overwhelming. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. And so we see that fine-tuning of the universe is also agreed on by top-notch secular scientists. Now, why they state this, they don't necessarily say, okay, you guys are right, there is a God, you know. Just like in biology, where Richard Dawkins says, everything has the appearance of design, but it is not designed. So they explain this away, and we'll get into that in a second. But before we do, what is the anthropic principle? Have you ever heard that word? Anthropic principle? Anthropic. Okay, you have? Okay, so this idea is kind of what we're talking about. This word kind of summarizes it in a nutshell. So you'll hear this on the street, this word, or these words, anthropic principle. And the idea here is just to kind of give you the picture, which we've been talking about, is there is a long and growing list of universal parameters, and by some accounts this is well over 300, whose magnitudes must fall within a very narrow range of values in order for life to exist anywhere in the universe. These contingent cosmological constants could be anything within any wide range of values. They could have been slightly off the numbers that they are. There's no scientific evidence or reason why they are the way they are. They could have been different. There's no reason why they are the way they are. Now, page 11. The critic of ID, or the naturalist, says that nothing forced them to be these particular numbers. They just happened to be that way. We were, in a sense, lucky to be alive in such a universe. So this is kind of the way they start treating this. They recognize all these cosmological constants, they recognize the extreme of probabilities, and they just say, well, I guess we're just lucky. Okay, that's the first thing how they respond. Whereas the ID person would say that yes, they could have been different, but the fact that they are not different is too uncanny. It seems someone has set them at their values to allow life. So this is how the ID person responds to all these cosmological constants and features of the universe that allow life. So there's two different responses. It seems that someone has set them at these values. I mean, it makes perfect sense to infer that when you start recognizing how perfectly set they are. So what we are getting into has been characterized and defined as the anthropic principle. And what that means is that the cosmos was pregnant with the potentiality for life at the Big Bang. Now, if you're a Christian and you do not hold to the standard Big Bang model, that's fine. You can still rephrase this. The Big Bang did not occur, but God set these parameters up the way they are because He planned for our existence. So He knew life would need to be here. So however He created the universe, He set these parameters the way they are. So since most ID theorists hold to a Big Bang model, they would adopt this ID version of the anthropic principle. Okay, so F, but not only life in a primitive life form sense, but life of the advanced kind. So what was in the Big Bang was the conditions that would obtain eventually for life of the advanced kind. So fine-tuning at the initial conditions. So that is, the conditions were so perfect that intelligent, rational creatures would be able to thrive and advance. Okay, so it seems that that intelligent life who could observe the universe was in mind at the initial creation event and in the expansion of the universe. So somebody had intelligent life in mind at the origin of the universe. Now, I'm saying here that atheists can't explain why it is possible for us. I want you to just take out the words "can't explain why" and just put atheists can't offer valid explanations. They can't offer valid explanations. And this is why I'm going to say they can't offer valid explanations, because we're going to talk about that in a second. But they do offer explanations. So here I'm writing they can't explain. Well, they can explain. What they're doing is just not valid. So they can explain. So atheists can't offer valid explanations for why it is possible for us, meaning how we got an intellectual ability, prime location, and perfect conditions to understand the universe. They can't explain how we got here and how we got to be on a planet that was so perfect and prime in its location that we can observe the universe. We could have been on a planet that had a atmosphere that didn't allow us to see out. So that is a very strong possibility and likelihood. So J, whereas Christians have a great explanation for our ability to understand a supreme intellect designed and fine-tuned a universe and Earth to allow for advanced life. So our explanation is just easy, it's simple, and it makes sense. It's obviously inferred when you start looking at it that an intelligent mind planned for intelligent life to be here. Okay, so K on page 12 is that our planetary location is primed to make these observations. And if you remember from 2 weeks ago, we talked about this idea of the privileged planet. Does anybody remember that conversation? Okay. All right. What can you tell us? Yeah. 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 So.
Our location.
Yeah.
In the galaxy as a spiral.
Yes. Right. What's that?
Was it the elbow?
The elbow. Yeah. Kind of this positioning on this cosmic band of space dust, where we happen to be between a cosmic band, or kind of on the outskirts of one of them, and we happen to be able to see outside of all this space dust past our galaxy. So, which is really cool to think about, right? So if you don't know what I'm talking about, here's the sun, all these planets, right? And we're on this one, right? I'm kidding. So we have like, I'm not sure how it works actually with this galaxy, but I believe it's something of this nature. Like if you go way out here, we're like this, and we're just let me redo this. This is our solar system right there. Okay, this is the way to think about it. And this is just a group of solar systems, and this is our galaxy, right? We're right there, and we happen to be just outside this kind of this ring of dust, this band of dust that's, say, that wide, I don't know. And then there's another ring of dust, if you will, that wide. We can kind of see past our ring of dust, if you will. That's the idea. We happen to be just located in just the right spot. And there's more to this too. There's other things as well that make us privileged. And that's what I'm saying here in K, is that we're at a very intriguing position in the universe, in our galaxy. So how did we get on a planet that is positioned so perfectly? And it seems clear that we were put here for a purpose. We were put here to see eventually the cosmos, to not just think rationally, well, there is a God and He created this beautiful planet that we're on today. But it turns out that He put us on a planet where we can actually see the rest of His creation, which is really cool. You know, we kind of take it for granted, you know, all these years, last 100 years with all this cosmological photography that we get, and it's available on the internet. We kind of take it for granted, like, oh yeah, it's just part of our existence. But we really don't stop to ask the question, could it have been otherwise? Yes, it could have. It could have been very different. We could have been completely turned away, essentially, or closed off from the rest of the universe. Now, the anthropic principle that we're talking about has two different versions. So I mentioned the ID version. So we could sum up the ID version by saying that this is basically it. When we think about the cosmos, when we consider all these cosmological constants, when we think about all the relationships and the other features of the universe that we observe, we are surprised to learn that the conditions necessary for life are so vastly improbable. And so it is pure design that our universe has these precisely perfect conditions for life. This is the intelligent design version of the anthropic principle. And one should be surprised, because if these conditions weren't precisely perfect, we wouldn't be alive to wonder about it. So it's kind of a weird thing to think about. So it is surprising that such an anthropic universe exists at all. So when we start thinking about this, we should be surprised. We should be like, oh, wow, it's surprising that this sort of universe and this sort of Earth exists in the first place. It didn't even have to be like this at all. The entire universe, the earth, nothing could have existed. So there's an argument in Apologetics. I think it has to do with Leibniz, who was a mathematician and philosopher in France around the time of Descartes. And the question is asked, why does anything exist at all? What best answers that question? Well, the God hypothesis answers that question best, whereas the secular naturalist does not really have a good explanation for that. And so the apologist uses that question and line of reasoning to help show that there is a God. And William Lane Craig has been adding this argument to his arsenal and using it in debates. So he gives talks on this very question. Why does anything exist at all? And I can't remember the name of the argument, but you may have heard me talk about the Kalam cosmological argument and the ontological argument and the moral argument for God's existence. So this is just one of those. And so this is kind of in a nutshell the intelligent design version of the anthropic principle. While the other version is the naturalist version of the anthropic principle. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. We'll take our break now. I'll pass these other handouts out, and we'll talk about these other theories of the origin of the universe after the break. Okay? I just passed out to you outline 13, and I'll kind of slowly take down the music to kind of ease our way back from break into lecture moment. That was our worship moment. What's that?
Slow fade transition.
Yeah, that's right. Chris Cuthill style. So we were talking about the anthropic principle, and we talked about the intelligent design version of it, that it's surprising that any universe like this exists at all, and it seems like God has designed it from the beginning, that we would be here. How he created the universe, it's up for debate at this point. We still haven't really got there. But most intelligent design theorists would hold to the standard Big Bang model. And so we could just leave it at that for now. We know that God created the universe as Christians. We're just trying to see if that makes sense and if that correlates to the data. And it turns out that it does. When we look at the universe, we see something that's highly improbable, but very, very, very finely tuned. So it connects with what the Bible teaches, that God created the universe. An intelligent mind with immense power had his hand in all of this. So the naturalist will respond very differently to all of these awesome scientific observations. So their version of the anthropic principle goes something like this. In the quote there, they say, or I'll just read this, naturalists hold that we are products of the universe. We are animated stardust. We're animated stardust. We, who are children of the universe, animated stardust, can nevertheless reflect on the nature of that same universe, even to the extent of glimpsing the rules on which it runs. So as animated stardust, we have the power to reflect on stardust and even glimpse into how the rules of what makes this thing work. So the naturalists hold that we are able to grasp the secrets of the universe and crack its cosmic code, if you will. But we are inescapably and intimately linked to it. So although we can understand it and grasp it, we are part of it. We're linked to it. We're byproducts of it. We can observe it, but we are it, essentially. We're just animated versions of it. So it is clear that even if we are a product of the universe, we are still in some way and somehow better than it. We are above and beyond it now. This was clear several hundred years ago to Christian philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal. So this is kind of a little stab back, if you will. Blaise Pascal, Christian philosopher, said this a few hundred years ago. He said, "Man is the feeblest reed in existence," kind of like a piece of grass or a weed. "But he is a thinking reed. Though the universe were to destroy him, man would be nobler than his destroyer. For he would know that he was dying, while the universe would know nothing of its own achievement of destroying the man." That would be the achievement of the universe. The universe would know nothing of it, but man at least would know that he's dying. And in that sense, he's more nobler than his destroyer. Now this is a powerful thought to think 300 years ago. Pascal was brilliant. Yeah, the calculus. Yeah, what was that called? There's.
It's just referred to as Pascal's calculator.
Oh, okay.
But I think he had a name for it.
Okay.
We created it with his dad.
And then he had Pascal's. There's another mathematical thing he was very famous for. What was it? Theorem. But it was like a pyramid of something or other. It is some What is it?
Triangle?
No. So anyway, Pascal was brilliant, and yeah, I wasn't actually familiar with the calculator. I was familiar with something else, but I don't doubt it.
Well, most people consider that the first computer, but some people consider the abacus.
Abacus, that's the name I was thinking of.
Depends on
Who you talk to. Yeah.
I mean, the abacus is give input to each algorithm.
Yeah. No, that's a computer, right? Depending on how you define computer. So the concept of the universe birthing us still must account for our ultimate superiority over matter, which it doesn't seem to do. So Pascal was very privy to this line of reasoning at the time. And he basically was saying that even though the universe still could be thought of as birthing us, if you're a naturalist, because we're animated stardust that gave birth to us, it still doesn't account for now our superiority over it. It still doesn't make sense of our rationality. Now, but the naturalists form the following versions of the anthropic principle. If the universe were not finely tuned for life, then humans would not be here to observe it. Thus, they claim the fine tuning requires no explanation. So that's one way they phrase this. The other way they phrase this is they say, if our universe is special, it is only special to the point that we exist as privileged observers, but beyond that, it is not special at all. So there's two ways that they say this. One they say is, if it wasn't fine-tuned for life, then we wouldn't be here to observe it. And so there's no explanation. It is what it is. It's fine-tuned for life. That's why we're here. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be here. Or they say, our universe is only special to the point where we can say we are privileged observers of it, but beyond that, it's not that special. That's as far as they will go. So they have these versions, weak anthropic principle, strong anthropic principle. We don't need to get into that all right now. So we could skip that part there. And if you look at the footnote, I have this extended kind of explanation of this idea of the weak anthropic principle, strong anthropic principle, and final anthropic principle down there at the bottom in the footnote. But the point is that our universe only appears special and unique. I guess you can take out the. It only seems this way to us. But the specialness and uniqueness we observe are explained away allegedly by the following theories. And we're going to get into now these alternative explanations that we brought up at the beginning. So again, what was important here in that last statement though, the two bold words, appears and seems. So they say either it's not special at all, or it's only special in the sense that we're privileged observers, but beyond that it's not special. And they say it just appears to be special. It appears that our universe and our planet is unique. It only seems this way to us. But we can explain all that away. Okay? So when we think about the naturalist strategy with biology and with astrophysics, is they use the idea that design is apparent and it's perceived, but it's not actual. We have the impression of design when we look at biochemistry. We have the impression of design when we look at cosmology. It appears to us that way. It seems that way to us, but it's not actual. It's not actually designed. So what they're trying to do is just create this separation between our intuition and what we logically infer by gut reaction, by instinct, and they create this wall of appearance. No, it's not really designed. You just think that because you're used to things being designed. But this is different. There's a naturalistic explanation. So this is the strategy for the naturalist when they talk about science all the time. As long as they have an explanation at all, it doesn't necessarily have to be backed by evidence, but as long as they can come up with an explanation that is science-y, then they've won. Because according to them, a naturalistic story or narrative will defeat the need for a designer. And like we talked about with that Henry Ford example, just because you can explain the car engine, the mechanism of the car, doesn't mean you get rid of Henry Ford, the designer of the mechanism. So even if they could explain everything with naturalistic causes, it doesn't mean you get rid of the agent that designed or caused the effect. And so this is very important that we keep this strategy at all times in our radar, in our conversations with people. Because a naturalistic explanation, according to them, does away for the need of an intelligent designer. And if you don't need an intelligent designer, then that explanation can be thrown out. It's not necessary. But that doesn't follow. That conclusion that an agent is not necessary doesn't follow just from the idea of using scientific explanations to explain scientific data. Yeah.
Kind of seems like sort of like the chicken and the egg. Like they say that they're used to things being designed, then like where does the capacity for design come from? If there is no actual design. I think you think the best natural not generate things, but like design is differentiation between things. So if there is none of that, where does it come from?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're saying is that how do you explain the idea that we can perceive design? Is that what you're saying? Or how do we get design at all? Anything being designed? Okay. Well, they can continue to say that. They can continue to say that in terms of naturalistic things like plants and animals, that's all just perceived as designed, but it's not designed. But when humans design things, that's designed. So then the question is, where does the ability to design come from? That's kind of the crux. And then that goes back to rationality. How does rationality emerge naturalistically from the brain? We talked about that way back at the beginning when we talked about refutations of naturalism, where they talked about this emergent brain or emergent mind that kind of supervenes on the brain. So yeah, that would be the crux of the design question. It goes back to rationality. Now on the next page, the first thing we'll look at is multiverse. So who here has heard of multiverse? And if you have, can you explain it? Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess there's this particular universe and its ways that it operates and it's put together. But multiverse is that in some way there is another universe that's put together, maybe in some way similar, in some way different, and then the question is how many of those are there? So there's these parallel universes coexisting, and yeah, at the same time. So we're not the only universe with the only properties.
Say it again. Friends. Oh, yeah. Oh, fringe. Yes.
Yeah, to add to that, I think what I heard was because the parameters for life in this universe are so, not probable, they came up with this, but really there's millions of universes out there, so the chance of one of those universes being able to sustain life is not that odd, because if you've got millions of these universes, then of course there could be one that could sustain life. But the problem, so that's what they call the multiverse. The problem is that there's no evidence that there are any universes out there.
Right.
It's just, they just make it up.
Okay, so we can skip to the next section now because you two covered it thoroughly. No, that was really good. Yes, you should give yourself an applause. That was very good. For those that weren't listening to these two, we'll cover it again here, but you guys nailed it. Thank you both.
Last time we met, you seemed like you hinted that these were multiverse came from alternate from the Big Bang. Is that true? Or did they say it came from the Big Bang?
Yeah, let me push pause on answering that because I think when we talk about these other explanations, that may answer that, if that's okay. But yeah, that's a good question. How did these multiverses originate? What caused them? Or these other universes? That's the question, right? Okay.
Do we know the basis of why that happened? This theory?
This guy?
Is this designed to explain?
Yes. Yeah. No. What's that?
Growing theory?
Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely building momentum. Definitely popular. Yeah. Yeah.
The irony of it is that it's kind of been around for a while, but as far as actually plugging it into real science, it's like very new.
Yeah.
But most of science history is like science fiction.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Star Trek in the 70s or something, probably we're talking about this. Yeah, this is becoming much more popular. So in terms of what you will hear on the street, you're going to hear this, guaranteed. Okay? So the multiverse. So just to kind of recap what's said already, that Britain's astronomer Royal, I guess he was a big shot, so they give him that name, Martin Rees, has proposed that the universe is just one of many universes. There is actually an ensemble of universes, a multiverse. There's so many of them, we're going to just call it a multiverse because there's a bunch of other ones. He says, countless others may exist in which the laws are different. Once we accept this, various apparently special features of our universe, those that some theologians once adduced as evidence for providence or design, occasion no surprise. I just did not bold that last part. So he's basically saying that once you put together a bunch of other universes, then what looks very special in ours is not very special at all, right? Because I could come in here with a perfect rose, for instance, okay? And I could say, give it to my wife. And I go out and I pick this rose amongst like a whole, just an orchard, if you will, or a garden of plants of all different kinds, and it happened to have like 3,000 rose bushes. Okay, and I go pick this perfect rose and I bring it to her. Okay, and then the next day I go and get another one just like it and bring it to her. She's just wondering, how improbable is it that you would get this perfect rose and bring it to me? It's perfect. Well, there's like 100 of these things, which is not that many when you have like 3,000 to choose from. So that's the idea here, is that it's not that special when you have a bunch just like it. And our universe is not that special because there happens to be hundreds like ours. Because it turns out that there are 10 to the 229th power universes out there. So it's not highly probable that you would get a universe. It is highly probable, you can take out not, that you would get a universe that has the perfect conditions for life. So C, it is the predictability of chance that a universe like ours, one that has the precisely perfect conditions for life, will eventually come about. You'll eventually get a life-bearing universe. One should not be surprised that these conditions are so precisely perfect for us to be alive to wonder about it. It shouldn't be surprising at all. In fact, we should expect it. We should expect another universe just like ours with life in it somewhere out there if you have this many universes. It is basic. So this idea of the multiverse basically claims that a universe like ours is highly probable to come about eventually. So it's not surprising that we are here to observe it at all. Now, it's like winning the lottery. Eventually, chance will make you a winner if you keep playing. Winning just happens to someone who plays. If you never play the lottery, you're never going to win. You only play one time, you're still barely ever going to win, right? I mean, the chances of you winning one time out of, say, instead of playing, say, a trillion times is very low. So you have to keep playing, 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 and eventually you're going to win. So being alive in a universe like ours just happens. We are the lotto winners, and no design is required to explain the winning lottery. We have the winning lottery ticket. There's no design necessary. We played enough times, we're going to win. So go ahead. There is a question in the back before we continue.
I want to point out on letter B, where it talks about the 10 and the 229 power universes. See that word if? If there are, then it's not unlikely you get a universe, but that's a big if. Because there aren't.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, we're going to get to that. No, he uses that number. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, why isn't it of infinity?
Yeah, every possible option.
That's
like buying all the lottery tickets.
That's right. That's right. Great point. Exactly. No, that's a great point. Let me just get to this point. Yeah. So what Dan just said is very smart, because in our universe, it's just like the universe next door to us, but in that one, green elephants exist and they fly, and they were able to transport themselves across planets and in and out of rooms without opening doors or anything. So right now, a green elephant in another parallel universe just appeared in this room with all of us sitting here, people just like us, and then it left again. Okay? In the parallel universe. That would be the only difference between that universe and our universe, is that green elephants can transport themselves across space and in and out of rooms. And they fly. That's the only difference. Everything else is exactly the same. You are sitting in this chair, or you prime is sitting in that chair, eating what you're eating. Because if an infinite number of universes exist, then every possibility will obtain. Everything that is possible will come about when you have an infinite number of possibilities. It's weird to think about, but it makes this whole concept of the multiverse absurd, because there's no keeping this universe at 10 to the 229 power. You can have an infinite number of them. And once you start really going down this line of thought, it becomes absurd. And then something that is absurd, rationally speaking, ought to be rejected, especially if it doesn't have any evidence. Now, here's the way we can kind of refute this idea of the lottery in item G and H here. For the lotto winner to claim a random chance win in the lottery, there needs to be other players who could also win. Without the existence of other lotto players, the lotto winner is the sole player, and he will win by default, not chance. If there were thousands of other universes out there, then this explanation of the anthropic principle would make sense. But without the existence of other possible universes, there is no way to claim that we are alive in the one possible universe that allows life out of the many possible universes out there. Because we don't know if there's other lotto players at all. Since there is no evidence for other possible universes, we cannot claim they exist. Thus, we cannot reasonably compare ours to something that does not exist and claim a random win. Does that make sense? We can't say, well, we're bound to win eventually if you just keep playing the lottery. Well, the problem with that analogy is that there has to be other lotto players. And there's no other lotto player out there that we know of. We have no evidence of other lotto players. So the fact that we won is still shocking. Why should ours be the universe that gets all of these conditions right for life? It's shocking that that's the case out of no other universes that are out there. So you have one chance to win the lottery and you won. And what they're saying is, well, it shouldn't be surprising because there's tons of other lotto players and you're just the one that won. If somebody's got to win. And you're the one that won and that's why you're here. Because you were in the one that won. So this is just they spin it. You have to recognize how they're spinning this example. Or how they're spinning the analogy, if you will.
Is it worthwhile to suggest that, okay, well, we're talking about lotteries, and I can have evidence of other lottery players by seeing them go in and out of stores or seeing how much the pool of money becomes. But where is your evidence of these other players, these other universes in play?
Right. Yeah, so this is the main criticism of this is that there's no evidence, and that's what Julie was saying. The reason why there's no evidence is because we cannot get past the boundary of our universe. There's no way to observe something that we know to be unobservable. So science can only inform us of something that it can observe, right? Or do an experiment on, or that humans can experience. There's no way we can experience another universe. If we could, it would be part of our universe. So by definition, we cannot attain evidence of another universe, because any observation becomes something science can recognize, calculate, estimate, predict, this sort of thing. So the multiverse has problems. Now, let's see, where were we? Okay, M. Thus we can reject this high probability anthropic principle. That's kind of the idea, is that their version of the anthropic principle says, no, it is highly probable. Ours is saying, no, it's extremely improbable, and it's shocking that we're here. And what it best explains the fact that we're here. They're saying, no, we're here because it's highly probable that we'd be here. So Lee Smolin, he's another famous cosmologist, he rejects this idea of the multiverse. He says that it makes it possible for it to explain almost anything. For among the universes, one can find most of the other equally unlikely possibilities, like I talked about with the green elephant. To argue this way is not to reason, it is simply to give up looking for a rational explanation. So this is just a devastating critique by a very, very, very famous cosmologist. Lee Smolin gives us another explanation that we're going to see here in a couple minutes. And he's basically saying that you're just giving up hope for a rational explanation by proposing the multiverse. So again, he's a secular scientist. And that's what he says. And so also in this view, when it is drawn out fully, it confuses the following. This true claim, it is highly probable that observers observe constants in the universe they are in to be finely tuned, And it says this false claim instead. It's highly probable that a universe exists with the appearance of fine-tuning that includes observers observing fine-tuning. So I'll let you go home and think about that. So that is, maybe this will help explain it. It is true to claim that the observers probably will see fine-tuning for their existence. It's false to claim that the universe in which anthropic conditions are present is probable to exist. That's all we're saying here. Now, we just kind of talked about it, but to keep moving forward, thus this formulation of the anthropic principle confuses the probability of our observation with the probability of the universe. So this is another reason to reject it. So, yeah, I don't want to keep staying on that, but I hope that makes sense. If we're a person in our universe, it's highly probable that we'd observe it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that our universe is highly probable. And so since we have no evidence, and I may not have written this clearly in the notes, but you can write it, and really big on the top of your paper, that there is no evidence for the multiverse. That's kind of the biggest point here, and it's probably not stated explicitly, but that's the idea, is there is no evidence for the multiverse. And what I explained earlier was that if there was thought to be any evidence, or if someone said they could make observations of it, then they are observing what is in our universe. And one couldn't say that it was another universe that's being observed. So this is kind of important to note that. And I probably didn't do a good enough job to make it explicitly.
Page 4L.
Page 4?
Yeah, letter L.
Oh, there's no evidence. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of the biggest point. Yes, Wei?
And what is their estimation of what the universe is?
That's a good question. Well, we know the universe is kind of shaped rather kind of like an oval, if you will, like a flattened oval. So the way we understand our universe is it's something like this. And when we're kind of like here, say, and there's like 50 gazillion light years to get to where the farthest we can see. But we know the universe is more like flattened in terms of what we know to be there than say what we can observe this way. So that's kind of the shape of what our observations tell us of the universe. But so they don't really know the boundary, really. We can only see so far. But that's kind of what we think how it's shaped based on our observations. So in terms of defining what a universe is, usually it's something that science can explain. Because if you're a scientist and you're talking about the universe, what is it? You have to use scientific explanations. You can't move past that. You can't go to the spiritual or the metaphysical. You have to stay in the scientific categories. So whatever they say it is, or whatever shape it has, or whatever's in it, it has to be explained using scientific observations.
So in terms of defining the universe, the universe is what we can observe through whatever means we have. Anything beyond that could be still part of the universe we can't see.
Yeah, so like dark matter, for instance. This stuff that we know to be there, but we don't know necessarily exactly what it is, or the Higgs boson particle field, for instance, all these things that are kind of hard to observe, almost unobservable. We know that they're there, and some can speculate that those things are another universe influencing ours. But you can't really speculate that. It doesn't make sense to speculate that, because I could speculate that Trisha is part of another universe influencing ours. I happen to be observing her, and so do you. But she's really some super alien. So, anything you can observe, it's hard to conclude. It doesn't follow that thing is part of a parallel universe. Someone really has no justification for concluding that. No one does that in the scientific realm, except for when they start talking about this stuff. It just doesn't follow, and most scientists just don't do that. Now, the other way they explain away the finely tuned features of our universe is they say that these parameters, these cosmological constants, change over time. So perhaps in 1 million years, the parameters will change and the conditions for life will no longer be present due to some unknown physical process which is already at work. So say there's this ethereal realm that's going to influence gravity, it's going to influence radiation, it's going to influence the electromagnetic force, it's going to influence the weak nuclear force. And once this realm starts pushing these forces to other constants, then they'll change and then the conditions for life will be impossible. And we just happen to be alive at a time when that realm was pushing these cosmological constants to a number that allowed for life. Eventually it'll push it to another number, all these other constants that don't allow for life. So this is the way they explain our existence. So again, Smolin, he says, it seems nevertheless to be our best hope for a completely rational understanding of the universe. By that he means natural one that doesn't rely on faith or mysticism. So this is, according to him, a pretty decent theory. But again, we have no evidence for this. Also, there is no explanation of our origins when someone says the changing parameters over time theory is valid. There's no evidence for it, and it doesn't explain our origins. Yeah.
So there's a ethereal, mysterious realm that's pushing parameters towards life that we can't see.
Or away from life. It's just fluctuating, doing random, yeah.
But it's not God. Mysterious, invisible realm.
Yeah.
Causing things to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and they would say, of course not. Of course not, it's God. It's not God. But they could also say that it may not even be a realm at all. It's just that these parameters fluctuate. Or they just go off. You know, they go from this number and keep rising or falling. And they happen to be rising and falling, and they all occurred just at the right number for us to be here. So sometimes people think of it as like levers. If you're in like a nuclear factory or something and you're pulling on levers. I'm not really drawing it well, but if you have all these cosmological constants and they could be, at any location, well, once they all are at the life level, if they're constantly changing, once they just happen to have the combination where they're fluctuating, they all achieve the life level, then we show up, and say they happen to be that way for trillions of years, eventually we showed up. But again, there's no evidence for this, that parameters are changing over time. We haven't seen them change. And it doesn't explain how we got here. Just because you have all these conditions in the universe doesn't mean you have advanced life. Okay, so the next theory is kind of the theory of everything. You may have heard this or seen documentaries on the Discovery Channel. So this is the idea that one theory will eventually explain the main other theories of science: electromagnetism, gravity, general relativity, quantum mechanics, and everything else. And this will explain physical phenomena we currently observe. So it's kind of this big shot theory, one theory to rule them all kind of thing. And this is a mathematical formula expressing currently understood physics in a way that combines other formulas, and it doesn't give an explanation of the origins of the universe. So this is kind of this idea of the M theory. It's just this one big overarching theory, and it seems that this one theory, once it's understood, will explain all the other theories, and when that happens, will explain everything. So that's kind of the idea of the M theory. It's not that exciting. There's nothing really to it. But people talk about it because they think that there's so much of science we still don't know, so much of the universe that is undiscovered, that once we keep investigating, we'll find that there's this one thing that we're really observing, even though we kind of call it gravity or electromagnetism or whatever, it's really this one thing. And that one thing will then explain more about our origins, for instance. But this has problems, and it just doesn't. It's not worth even getting into. Okay. Okay, balance hypothesis. So, here's another theory that they give, is that the universe expands and contracts. So we observe currently an expanding universe, and it's stretching the universe out to the ends of space, if you will. And right now it's expanding, but later on it will be contracting. And eventually it'll all come together to one singularity in which another big bang will happen. And then it will expand out again, and it will go on and on and on like that, expanding for what seems like forever, but eventually it'll start contracting again. It'll start losing acceleration, it will decelerate, and then it'll start contracting in on itself to a singularity. And then it'll explode again and expand again. So this expanding and contracting is kind of considered this bouncing of the universe, if you will. It keeps coming and going in and out of existence. And this bounce hypothesis is a current theory that's on the table. But the problem is, again, we have no evidence for this. And unfortunately, theories with no evidence are merely hypotheses that have yet to be tested and should not be held to. So if I have a hypothesis that Steve is really a cat that happens to have ninja-like capabilities, well, that's a very good hypothesis, and you may applaud me for being such a good scientist, but the problem is there's no evidence for Steve being a ninja cat. And so theories with no evidence just don't work. Now, yes, Steve.
Is our universe, is it not expanding? Is it slowing down?
It is expanding.
But it's slowing
I don't know if it's
I know we're taking class.
going for, yeah. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but I know it's still expanding. Yeah. Now, the next theory is black hole created universes, okay? So this is the idea that the black holes, when they suck everything in nearby, they suck in the entire universe, or at least a bunch of stuff nearby it, to create another universe. So, what happened before the Big Bang? Were there any physical processes or laws at all? That's the question is. Our universe, allegedly, is from another black hole in another universe. And so what happens is, when you have a black hole, it sucks everything into infinite density and heat. Well, that's kind of like a singularity, like we talked about with the Big Bang. So when you get a singularity in a black hole with infinite density, you're going to get an explosion. And what this theory says is that eventually, as black holes suck stuff in, you're going to get another universe coming out the other side. And this process just continues forever. In that new universe, you're going to get a bunch of other black holes. And those black holes eventually suck stuff in to create a singularity of infinite density, and then out comes another universe. So you just get a bunch more universes and a bunch more black holes and a bunch more universes, a bunch more black holes, and as time passes, you just have essentially like a multiverse obtaining, if you will. So, and each universe would have its own physical laws. Each universe would have its own constants as the black holes generate new ones. It's like a reproducing machine, if you will. Each universe has a bunch of black holes, and all of these black holes will create universes with different conditions, and one of these will eventually create a universe with conditions for life. This is the black hole created universe theory. Question?
So this theory, along with the previous one, is built upon the idea that there's an infinite level of energy available. And do we see any evidence for this within our universe, infinite energy? Perpetual motion.
Perpetual motion machine. That's what it is.
Does that violate energy?
Well, it's hard to say infinite energy is what's being proposed. I would say it's energy that's being transformed, but energy could have just been in existence, from the infinite past. That's the idea.
That would be infinite energy, wouldn't it?
Oh, if that's what you mean. Not infinite in terms of its capability. I don't think they propose that. They would just say eternal energy. Yeah. Eternal energy would be able to create this perpetual motion machine. Yeah.
We see the evidence for eternal energy.
Exactly. So the critique of this is that there is no evidence. Right. We can't survive a black hole. We can't go out the other side to live in that new universe. So this theory has problems. We can't get past our universe. Again, we're stuck. We're limited to our scientific observations. And this is what they want. This is what the scientist wants the Christian to be mindful of. Hey, don't tell me something that you can't scientifically observe. That's what the secular scientist will always say to the ID theorist. But here they are creating this whole plethora of theories that have absolutely no evidence. And it's very problematic, and it makes them look kind of foolish. And they contradict themselves. If you're a naturalist and you say to the ID theorist, show me the evidence, and we show you evidence, and then you start proposing black hole created universes, then you're refuting your own philosophy. Now, to read this quote, we live instead in a continually growing community of universes, each one of which is born from an explosion following the collapse of a star to a black hole. So there never was a God. All there is of nature is what is around us. All we have of natural law is a world that has made itself. Okay, so this is the Lee Smolin talking, and he was very famous for proposing this. But it has problems, like we just mentioned, that there is no evidence for this. I'm trying to hammer down that point. There is no evidence for any of these theories so far. And mathematician and philosopher David Berlinski, an ID theorist, he rejects this idea as preposterous cosmological myth based in speculative metaphysics with no evidence and will always be unobservable. So Berlinski says, there should be R there. Berlinski says, this isn't science, as science is concerned with truth, not myth. And he says, what law of nature could reveal that the laws of nature are contingent when Smolin's theory is self-applied and it self-destructs? So he's just kind of bashing this theory. And these other physicists like Alan Guth, Roger Penrose, and Martin Rees, very famous astrophysicist, who applaud these theories, are careless and taking their social privilege position too far. So basically, Berlinski is saying that these guys who are top-notch cosmologists, who are respected by the media, by the popular person, respected by the other academicians, they are taking their privileged position too far. They're sitting in the Ivy Tower and they're making up stuff now. And they're kind of being, they're just getting beyond science. Now, this last one is the boundless finite universe. Now, who here has heard of Stephen Hawking? Come on. I know you all have heard of Stephen Hawking. Okay. He's probably the most famous because he's in his wheelchair, but before that he was, and still is, extremely brilliant. The historian of science, Richard Olson at the Claremont Colleges, says that the optimism of the Big Bang creationists was dealt a substantial blow by Stephen Hawking. So he says Big Bang creationist, so that should stand out to you right there. Now, he's saying that okay, what happens is when you have a Christian apologist who says that the universe had a beginning, just like the Bible said, that means Christianity and the Bible correlate with science. When the Christian apologist starts making these claims and starts talking about that because the universe had a beginning, there must be a cause of that universe, an intelligent, free agent, the scientific community backs up and says, okay, we got to figure something else out. We can't have a true beginning to the universe. We have to have an apparent beginning, an alleged beginning. So he's basically saying, he's saying that Stephen Hawking delivered a substantial blow to the Christian apologists who are saying that the first cause was God, by saying that there is by Hawking's view. So when Hawking proposed this view, amongst these other views, which are also trying to do away with this true beginning, Hawking's proposing this idea of a large-scale physical phenomena from traditional supports for notion of a transcendent God. So he's differentiating this notion of a transcendent God. And so does Hawking's theory demolish the idea of a creator behind the Big Bang singularity? So world-renowned eminent cosmologist Stephen Hawking proposes that the initial conditions only appear to come from a singularity or boundary. It's just apparent, it's not actual. There's really not a singularity there. There's really not a boundary to our universe in the past. There's not a Big Bang. This may be true in real time, as we know it now. However, in imaginary time, there is no boundary. When combined with the principle of uncertainty in quantum physics, one can see how the complex entities of the universe are explained. Okay, basically Hawking is proposing this idea that general relativity and quantum mechanics related to each other at the initial moments of the universe. But it turns out that that wasn't the initial moment. It was just a boundless moment. So there was no boundary. So when we talk about a singularity at the Big Bang, you can think of kind of an infinitesimal space. It's just so small, it's just tiny. It's extreme density, infinite density. That would be a singularity to space and time. In other words, note that wasn't space. The Big Bang is not an expansion into a pre-existing space. The Big Bang is an expansion of space itself. Time began at that moment. That's kind of what the standard Big Bang model holds, that it was an expansion of space and time began. Well, Hawking says no, the Big Bang really wasn't that at all. All of the laws of nature that we know today, we test and we observe, didn't really occur or weren't really the way they are now then. Right at that infinitesimal density singularity, it was different than our universe is now. It had very different laws of nature, if you will. And due to quantum fluctuations and general relativity, and these things coexisting at the same time, and how there's so much uncertainty there, time and space acted differently. So we can't really say what it was like. We can't really say it was a singularity because things were different in that infinitesimal space. So he is proposing a finite universe that has no boundary. Okay, the singularity would be the space-time boundary of our universe, is thought of as the Big Bang model. But he's saying no, there is no boundary, no beginning or end, as the space-time surface is more spherical and is a finite surface with no boundary rather than a finite straight line. Okay, I know this is getting a little weird, but basically he's proposing this idea that there is no spatial or time boundary. So when you think of space and time, it's kind of like we usually think of three-dimensional space and another dimension of time. So we have, say, 4 dimensions. But many have said there's 9 dimensions of the universe. We don't need to go there. Let's just say think of the 4, 3-dimensional space and 1 dimension of time. All of that was very different at the beginning. It wasn't a space-time boundary to these dimensions. It was a boundless occurrence. So he proposes a finite, boundless universe. Okay? So here's a quote from him. So long as the universe had a beginning, we could suppose it had a creator. But if the universe is really completely self-contained, having no boundary or edge, it would have neither beginning nor end. It would simply be. What place then for a creator? Now, even if Hawking admits that this is just a proposal and must be subjected to verifiable observations, to which he states, he even admits this. He admits it has to be observed. This, however, is difficult to determine in the case of quantum gravity, and even then the problem of extracting predictions remains a formidable one. So he admits that it's going to be extremely hard to get any evidence of this theory, and practically impossible because of what he calls quantum gravity at this moment. So this theory, as well as the other possible universe theory, have some similar challenges, namely that there is no empirical data available. There's no evidence, as Hawking himself acknowledges. Thus, we can reject this proposal as there's no evidence and it remains conjecture. And additionally, cosmologist Paul Davies expresses that there are still unresolved issues and questions with Hawking's theory. His theory falls short of explaining our origins, for one can still ask why that loop, or why does any loop exist at all. So I mentioned loop, I mentioned quantum gravity, space-time boundary. I'm not really explaining all of that, but if this helps, I'm not sure it will, but the whole idea with his theory is that, and I don't know which one of these theories is more popular, probably the multiverse, but Hawking's theory, if somebody knows it, they probably know more than we do, because most people just don't take the time to learn this stuff. But it could be said that many people ask, what would happen if you get to the singularity? Well, you'd reach a boundary, right, at the beginning of time. Well, Hawking says that question's irrelevant, because the universe is kind of, if you think of it as spherical, if you will, okay, and if someone says, what happens when you get past the South Pole? Well, nothing. You don't continue to drift off into endless abyss. You just go to the other side, right? If I'm coming down this side, I'm going to the other side. If I go to the South Pole. So that's what he's saying, is that there's no singularity there. It's kind of a round space-time continuum, if you will, and you just keep going. So it's hard to understand, but that's what he's saying, is that there is no boundary. It's more like the South Pole. You don't drift off into the abyss, you just continue circulating the planet. And that's the idea with the space-time boundary. It's a boundless, it has no boundary, finite, it's not infinite. It's contained in that sense. And so we live in a boundless, finite universe. So that's this theory. I don't know if that helps, because it is a little tricky to understand. There's a book back there called The Grand Design, and I would recommend you pick it up. It's very much not a Christian book. It's very secular, but this is one of Hawking's famous books. Now, Berlinski goes and criticizes this as well. He says, this is an absurd scheme to model time on the basis of complex numbers, because he talked about imaginary time. Okay, he calls this an unhappy example of a cosmologist who says anything that pops into his head. So he's really being critical here, just saying that these guys are just making up stuff. He says the physicists carry on endlessly because they can. We give them this privileged position in society, and they just go on and on and on and make up stuff. And he criticizes Hawking, as well as others, for not being honest and true to the data that we actually do have. Instead of making up myths, he wants physicists to admit that we just don't know the secrets of the universe. So Berlinski kind of deals a devastating blow of criticism to these guys, and he's an ID theorist that hangs out with Stephen Meyer and the other guys. Now, we can conclude at this point, and as you can imagine, design obviously is the best explanation, and that's kind of all I'm saying here on this page. And I think it's a little bit interesting if we read this. Item 6 there. It seems to be meant for us at this time in history, for us to see that He is the reality that the equations point to, and that He is reality that the beauty flows from. He is the eternal fountain of physics and life. And in this sense, His universe, His earth, is the one in which we live, move, and have our being, just like Paul says in Acts. So if God exists in the certain ways that Christian scripture tell us He does, an ordered God and a beautiful God, we ought to be able to confirm it by looking at the creation. So we go look for evidence of His existence, and what have we found? We have found evidence of order and beauty. Just like God says He is, that's what we go find. He is ordered and beautiful. He is truly a being of such a great mind and great power. And He surely did not just scribble around with just a few colored crayons, drawing random scratch marks and hoped it worked out. He didn't do that, no. In terms of art, He is more like a Da Vinci and Rembrandt than a toddler. He spent a lot of time on the details. He made it possible for us to be an advanced species, and a species that has the capability of and technology at hand to observe the universe. And this is just phenomenal. And so we are reminded of these thoughts here. Isaac Newton, he said this: "Whence arises all that order and beauty we see in the world?" King David, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge." And that's exactly what we get when we observe space. We get knowledge, just like David said. And Paul says, "Ever since the creation of this world, His eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things He has made. So they are without excuse." They meaning the unbeliever. So, it's important that we end there, because the Bible teaches a God who has created the universe. And what do we go find when we observe the universe? We find beauty, order, and the marks of intelligence. And that is the best explanation of the universe, of its origins. Naturalistic explanations don't even come close to explaining the origins of the universe like our explanation does. In fact, naturalistic explanations have no evidence. And that is perhaps the most important part of this whole discussion. Now, what could then explain the Big Bang? If someone is talking about the standard Big Bang model, what could explain that? Well, they could say that quantum fluctuations in a vacuum with an energy field gave rise to matter. And that's what that Higgs boson thing was all about last year. Do you remember that? This massive circular underground proton or electron collider machine in France, Switzerland border area. That was evidence of this boson field called what they called the Higgs boson particle field. And it's the idea that mass can obtain when you have energy in a quantum vacuum. So all of a sudden you can get mass, and that's what was the missing ingredient to the Big Bang in terms of the theory. Well, they would say that that's a naturalistic explanation. Therefore, you can eliminate an agent. Well, again, we still have the problem of that being a non sequitur, meaning it's a logical fallacy to get rid of an agent just because you can explain something. So the question is, did God use the Big Bang to give rise to the universe? Well, most Christians are divided on this topic. ID theorists most likely hold to this. You can make your own mind up. Did God use quantum fluctuations and energy flowing through it to give rise to mass, which eventually caused the Big Bang? Study it on your own time. It'll be interesting, I guarantee it. But that's as far as we'll go here in this class, is looking at the Big Bang and just saying, this seems to be, if you hold to an old Earth universe view as a Christian, the most rational explanation of the origins of the universe, rather than the universe being around, or the universe being eternal, because that would be possibly the other best view. But then that's a logical fallacy too. That creates a logical fallacy. So there's problems. So if you're an older theorist, I would recommend holding to the Big Bang model. Now, how God caused that all and how God set the fine-tuning up with that's a very hard thing to understand. So we'll close there. And if you have questions, we talk after. Now, I will say this. The next 2 weeks, since we all voted to continue, we'll be looking at how the Bible then could be related to all these scientific observations. What does the Bible tell us? What sort of theories can we derive from the Scripture, or at least are relatable to the Scripture in some way, shape, or form? And you'll be able to be the judge on which theory is appropriate for the Scripture and the science. Okay? So we'll just leave it at that for now. If you guys have questions, you can chat after. Dear God, thank you so much for this time, and thank you for challenging us to learn new ideas and understand some new concepts and encounter new terminology. And I pray that you would help us to know you better by contemplating these things and learning more about them, and understand your handiwork and your power and your knowledge. And we pray that you would bless us this week and keep us safe. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thanks. Hopefully it was interesting and not too confusing.